So a SOC role in my mind, while it does vary somewhat organization to organization, I would say there's a core of the job that's pretty much the same across no matter where you work. Those things would be looking at potential issues like alerts raised from your EDR or an IDS or something like that, that are saying, hey, something might be attacking you, and then trying to decide, hey, is this a true or a false positive? And doing that is going to involve looking at logs, looking at packet captures, cloud data, and basically all the data sources that that organization happens to have, and then deciding if this is a true positive, what has happened, what's the scope of the incident, and then potentially passing it off to incident responders or potentially moving into incident response yourself. Some SOCs have SOC analysts do incident response and kind of the whole detection engineering thing, like threat hunting and other things like that. And others are a little bit tighter in scope and they have individual people assigned to those individual roles. So I would say like the core of being a SOC analyst is definitely looking at what might be attacks and trying to qualify what's true and what's a false positive, and then taking apart the stuff that is real. But it might be more than that as well, depending on how big the team is. Yeah, for a SOC role focused course, I think the three best courses we have that align with that job role, as opposed to like specific tasks or specific things, would be 450. Of course, 450 is kind of like the first stepping stone and kind of the line of courses that I would recommend for someone looking for SOC role specific training. Sec 511 would be the second one. That one's a little bit more advanced and command line and I would say threat hunting focused. That is Gmon cert that goes with that. And then 551, of course, being the management piece of that. There are some other courses, though, that would go fantastic with SOC roles for those who want to specialize in specific things. So what I'm thinking there, 503 GCIA, intrusion analysis is that class. 503 has been a big hit for SANS for a long time. And anyone that is working in a SOC is going to need to understand deeply how to take apart network captures and look at packets. And that is absolutely the class for that. There's Sec 504, which gets into more into the incident handling stuff. That's another big one that's been around for SANS for a long time. Sec 555, which is focused on detection engineering, which is looking at how can we turn the data we have into actionable dashboards and other useful representations for enriching that data to make it better and make it easier to produce high fidelity detections for any attacks that do happen. So I think 555 is probably maybe my fourth choice for someone going into a SOC role. It's a great class for that sort of thing. Beyond that, other specializations, we got 573 and 586, which are more kind of automation focused, depending on if you're more interested in PowerShell or Python. We have the brand new, just announced 673, which is advanced information security automation with Python. And beyond that, Forensics 610 for those who want to take apart malware, 530 if people want to get a little bit into the infrastructure and preventative controls that might help prevent problems going into a SOC. But those are some of my favorite ones, I would say, that I most often see people within the realm of SOC jobs get interested in. One of the big things I'm always talking about in all classes is the need to drive what you're doing based on the best possible threat intelligence that you can gather. And so for every organization, it literally comes down to asking the question, like, what are the biggest, most likely to happen high impact attacks that could happen here? And who would do those to us? And are there people out there actually doing that to this industry right now? So anything maybe we could do to help people connect with those resources that are out there. MITRE's got a bunch of stuff. There's a lot of free kind of threat intelligence databases out there. Maybe we can kind of point at some of that stuff to help people find those sorts of things. The tools and technology piece of it is also really important, and processes. And all of that is a really big discussion. But I would say one of the core questions that a lot of people ask is like, what kind of data do I need to be able to collect and what should I prioritize? And the prioritization comes from, well, with those high impact attacks, like how would they happen and what kind of evidence would they leave if they were happening in your environment with the software and operating systems and kind of setup that you have involved, whether it's more cloud focused, on-prem, whatever it is. there are certain data sources that you have to collect in order to be able to see those things. So, like Microsoft has a security operations guide that was brought up with Mark and Carissa in the Blueprint episode. That kind of thing I think would be great because nearly everyone's using Windows and Active Directory and Azure AD to some extent. So those kind of things might be really nice. And then maybe some of the other tools that help people with detection engineering. So something like MITRE's CAR, which is the cyber analytics repository. It's a great list of, so you want to detect this thing from MITRE attack? Well, here's a mostly written rule for you kind of in pseudocode that can get people started if they're not really sure what to look for a particular type of attack, but maybe they know the TTP because it's listed on MITRE's attack framework. So I think those things would probably be pretty useful to basically everyone working in the SOC. How I define the SOC, and I do generally have the same comment when I discuss it. SOCs are different shapes and different people depending on the organization, whether it's gigantic, whether it's a small team. Very, very different scope of what people do. Generally, I think what I would call the SOC, at least, is the set of people who are monitoring the network and the endpoints and whatever the company assets are for anything that is happening that might be related to a cybersecurity incident. And they're in charge for detecting those things, monitoring that data, threat hunting, and then at least partially acting on anything that they find. I do point out that sometimes SOC analysts do the full incident response and some don't. So you can include that or not, depending on the SOC and the size of the SOC that you're looking at. But I think the core of working and having, or working in a SOC and having a SOC, is the ability to detect threats and respond to those threats, whoever that is. Absolutely. Yeah. Every time I'm teaching now, I'm polling people, hey, do you have a physical SOC that you're ever going back to? Are you ever building one? Or is everyone virtual? Are you going half and half, kind of hybrid model? And what I have found is, well, in the past, many times the SOC work was like, this is kind of sensitive information, right? Let's have people come into work. We'll have a special room. Sometimes people do, sometimes people don't. Now there is a lot more remote work possible and expected from a lot of the people doing these roles. People like the flexibility that is gained in their life when they can work from home a couple of days a week. So I would say generally, I see the trend going towards more virtual work. There are certainly some SOCs that are entirely virtual teams, but a lot of people are hiring in their local area and having rules where like people should be in the office, 2 days a week or something like that. And while they have the ability to work virtually, they're still kind of within the geographic region. And so it's a little bit of a mix of stuff, I think, is where most companies would like to aim, because, I think there are benefits of having groups of humans together in the same room, certainly. But also no one wants to be held to that all the time, no matter what, because there is some flexibility needed in the job. And so if you can, this bar is like government and doing classified work, of course, but for SOCs that enable people to have that flexibility, I think employees and SOC analysts and people associated with security teams are definitely looking for that more and more, and employers are generally allowing it because it seems like it's working okay. The diagram that's in the security operations guide we have on the website is pointing out kind of the answer to the previous question to some extent, which is like, what is a SOC doing? And on that diagram, I have 5 core things that I think are basically in common with most SOCs, which is collection. That's kind of the first. This is like a chronological how you solve problems order as well. Collection, you have to collect the right data. If you can't see the attack, there's no way you're going to stop the attack. So the very first thing you have to do is make sure you have the right visibility in your environment to see what's happening inside of it. From there, detection. We have the detection phase, which is sorting through what could be, gigabytes, terabytes, even more, right, of data, and trying to find the needle in the haystack. Ideally as accurately as possible, keeping out the false positives. Detection is a whole job in some SOCs. It is writing high quality rules for an entire role for some people, and other times SOC analysts do it. But it's an important thing. Try to get right as best you can. And then if that's the case, right, we are sending alerts that SOC analysts generally are going to be looking at. to a triage queue of some sort where there's going to be maybe 10 things happening at once. The key to success in the triage stage is very much the analogy I always use is like an emergency room. A bunch of people are coming in at once. Some of them have to be seen right away. Some of them can wait, right? And that's the same thing for alerts. You have to be able to easily tell, ideally with automatic context provided to analysts, hey, this is the one that represents a really dangerous attack that's partway through right now, versus another one that's maybe someone just scanning the perimeter of your network and you're like, we don't really care about that. Assuming you can pick out the right alert to work on, that moves to the next stage, which is investigation. Investigation is where we take that incident that may or may not have happened and we verify, is this a true or false positive? If it's a false positive, throw it out. If it's a true positive, we have to dig in deeper and say, all right, what really happened here? What other details and context can I gather? And then pass that over to our last function, which is going to be incident response, which really is also doing a whole lot of investigation too. The investigation stage kind of really happens in two different parts. There's the investigation to verify whether something bad happened, did or did not happen in that initial, how bad is it, and scoping of that, versus the, all right, we have a big incident here. Let's tear this all apart, do the forensics and everything else. So incident response is the last phase, and that is finding the problem, scoping the problem, eradicating the attacker, containing all the issues, cleaning everything up, and then recovery and returning back to normal. And all of those things, I think, are pretty core experiences for anyone working in the SOC that they have to pay a lot of attention to making sure they get right. The front end of that process, the detection and collection, that is largely fed by threat intelligence, which is why I always say you have to have really, really good threat intelligence to tell you what to spend your time on, because we don't have infinite resources to look at everything all the time. And then we have the kind of the forensics happening on the back end. If you have forensic specialists helping out with malware or dead box hard drive forensics type stuff. And then we have red teams and offensive kind of security practitioners that are ideally pen testing and red teaming and checking that whole process works as intended. That's kind of what's represented on that diagram there. And really all of it's important to a functioning security team. There's a lot of different ways you can organize your org chart for your security team. And I look at it maybe in a different way from some other people. There are certain things that have to get done to make a security team work well. Largely all those things that I just said, and a whole bunch of stuff beyond that for like vulnerability management and everything else. And some companies put all of those things within the SOC org chart, all kind of reporting up to maybe a common security director or someone like that. And other companies will break it out into subgroups. The company I previously worked for did that, right? They had one group that was like the pen testers and the vulnerability management and DLP, data security, application security. They had their own director, and then there was the SOC, which kind of had its own director, and we were doing all the stuff that I just listed, basically the collection, detection, threat hunting, incident response. We had separate groups for forensics and everything else. And ultimately, higher up, they all met someone, at one point in the org chart. My take on that is there isn't probably a right answer for everyone, because you need to have all these things functioning correctly. And I don't think that there's one magic combination of who reports to who, especially given the variability of organizations and how people interact with each other, that you could ever guarantee is going to be the right one. So I tend to take a look at it and say, well, here are the things that have to happen. And if you can get the correct metrics, make sure they are happening, and you are, generally dealing with security problems, then you probably have an org chart that works for you. If you find that people aren't communicating, if you find that things are falling through the cracks and, no one really knows what other people are doing that are like what other groups are doing that have information that's critical to success in your role, then maybe it's time to talk about, these teams should be a little bit closer together. Maybe they do need to report to the same person and kind of have them closer together on the org chart. So that's kind of how I approach it. It's not really, it's a dodge of the question a little bit, but it's a more practical, just like if stuff is working, that org chart's probably okay for you. If it's not working, it could be the org chart, it could be something else, but there is no one solid recipe that I think that works for everybody. A SOC analyst role, the day-to-day responsibilities are really making sure if anything's going on in the network that you find it. And then you figure out what it is as fast as possible and start acting on it. So when I was a SOC analyst, my day-to-day life was very much go into work, talk with the team in the UK. We had a kind of a shift changeover meeting, learn about what they had already been seeing, they had already been working on, and then kind of pick up the ball and continue running with it, as well as deal with anything new that was happening. On a day-to-day basis, that was looking at email that was reported as potentially suspicious or malicious, looking at all the alerts that went off for anything that happened in the environment, whether it was virus detection, suspicious network traffic, things in the cloud, whatever. Uh, all of those things needed to be dealt with. Locking accounts if people had somehow become compromised, and initiating those kinds of things. Getting people kind of passed off to the help desk to get them back to normal and get their computer wiped and cleansed, so to speak. Those kinds of things, right? Day to day, you're looking at a technical challenge of finding new viruses, new attacks, staying up with those things, and making sure you catch as much as you possibly can and act on it before it becomes a serious problem. As a manager, you're looking to make sure your team is doing that, and you need to have the measures to help tell you, is the SOC and all of the security tools and processes, are those all running as we expect them to? So is it business as usual today, or are some of our log sources broken and maybe we're not seeing what the firewall is seeing because it went down or something somewhere was broken? Are there any problems in what analysts are doing in terms of quality of investigation, and really just kind of checking, managing, and leading the whole operation. So yeah, definitely a very, very different role. And that brings into question, like, how do we know that what we're doing is the right thing? And so talking to stakeholders for the SOC and saying, hey, what do you need out of us? Here's what we're doing right now. Is that the right thing? Do you need something else? What's coming down the line, so that you can kind of shift left, as the saying goes, and prepare for that new software or that new production system to appear, and not just be like, told one day, hey, we got this new system online and it's already going, you want to secure it, right? Like, you got to stay ahead of that stuff. And so doing the communication and kind of further up the chain, liaisoning with different parts of the business, so that the security team is doing the right thing and securing the right data in the right places, is a lot of what being a SOC manager is about. This one is a little bit tough. Every environment is made of a different mix of tools. And ideally, you are 100% proficient with your tools that you are using in your environment. Someone that's using Elastic versus QRadar versus Splunk as a SIM, three entirely different tools, right? But you have to do the same thing in them. You have to be able to search logs, visually represent data, threat hunt, do whatever it is. So the easiest answer to that question is your employer should be giving you vendor training, so that when one of those tools is purchased, the vendor themselves is saying, here is how you use our tool. As someone that either doesn't have the tool yet or is trying to get into security, it's a little bit tougher, but still not impossible. There are free and open source alternatives that you can download. Security Onion is one that everyone always talks about, that have analogous features to all of the commercial products. And if you learn how to use that kind of a suite, you'll still be doing packet analysis, searching through log files, everything else. And if you learn how to do stuff on the free tools, you at least have the head up of like, okay, this is the kind of task I need to get done. I just need to know how to translate what I'm doing here to the tools that I have over here. So it's not completely useless if you can't use the specific tool you want to learn to fall back to open source software. But beyond that, a lot of those tools, the professional tools that are commercially available, also have like free versions. So Splunk, for example, has the ability to install it and play with it. And as long as you're only throwing a couple hundred megs of data in it, you can use it for free and practice and learn. And most vendors also have some level of kind of free training and other resources that are available so that people can learn that stuff. So kind of digging through all of those kind of multiple methods of learning things is kind of how I've seen people best put it together. It's 100% critical, because if you're not collecting anything, you're not going to see anything, and nothing after that can happen, right? A SOC that is able to collect all the data from all the endpoints that might be, well, not all the data, collect security relevant data, as in the things that would point out whether an attack was happening or not, is a SOC that's set up for success. That being said, there's a lot of SOCs out there that have partial data collection and visibility issues. They may see one part of their network really well, but not some other branch where maybe there's less infrastructure and less security tools installed. They may not see their cloud environment as well as their on-prem environment. So getting it right, 100% crucial, right? If you can't see the attack, you can't stop the attack. And part of being a good SOC, I think, is constantly working to ask the question, am I seeing all the security relevant information that I need to be collecting? How can I measure that? And then how can I make sure that that is continuing to happen or grow, so I can see more and more information on a day-to-day basis? Factors in quite a lot. So with automation, what we're trying to do is get rid of the things that there is no need for a human brain to be involved in, which tend to be the things that are also boring and people don't like to do anyway. With the SOC, there's a lot of things that you are doing somewhat repetitively and somewhat predictably. When there are phishing alerts, right? You're always looking at what's in the email. Is it a bad link? Is it a bad file? What's at the link? What does the file do? Throw it in a sandbox or something like that. And so those kind of tasks can be done faster and more reliably, potentially, with using automation to jump right in. Oh, there's an alert for an email that came in. Do half the work for you, present the results to an analyst, and then let them interpret it where a brain is actually needed, as opposed to a script or something that you can just fully automate. So automation is really lowering the bar for teams to be able to get more done with less human resources and collect more data, while not scaling up how many people they need to collect that data in a much more effective way, right? With more data coming in from all of our cloud platforms and SaaS applications and everything else that's out there, we can't just scale people like we scale data. And so automation is playing a big role in taking some of the boring and not so fun parts of the job off our hands and leaving us with more exciting stuff. And it's something that I think is pretty crucial for any SOC to try to get into in some respect. Whether you have a dedicated automation tool or not, you should be asking, what are the things that are slowing me down, and how can I speed them up with automation? Big trend with SOAR platforms and things like that all across the industry, and a lot of people seeing a lot of success and much happier analysts with those solutions available. Yeah, the things that make the list for what to record are a little bit different organization by organization, but largely it's driven by threat intelligence and some pretty common things that happen across nearly all attacks. So, credential theft and things like that. The way to do this kind of from scratch is to start with looking at the threat environment, saying, what are attackers doing to organizations like us? What have we seen in the past? And what are the tactics and techniques that were used to get those things done? And then if those things were to be happening in the environment, what kind of mark are they leaving? What kind of logs are they writing? What kind of traffic are they producing? And that's the stuff you want to collect. In the lack of ability to collect everything, well, I don't like saying collect everything, because people are like, oh, I have to have everything, and it gets super expensive and impractical. In the inability to collect as much as you would like to collect, let's say, collecting the things that are going to be most likely to point out a high impact attack are the things that definitely need to be on the list. And then the stuff that is maybe less likely or less important or less damaging if it was to occur, those are things that are less likely to make the list. In all reality, though, a lot of this is just like, do you know if someone's account is compromised? Do you know if someone's trying to launch exploits at some open port on some service somewhere? Do you know who's talking to who on the network, looking for lateral movement? All of those things and all the MITRE ATT&CK tactics and techniques are really kind of the core of it. And the tactics speak to what happens in nearly every type of, or nearly every case in every advanced, targeted attack. Lateral movement, discovery, collection, persistence, those sorts of things. And there are certain ways that attackers love doing those things. So the way that seems to be the favorite at the time is what I usually recommend people to look at, learn, gather from your threat intelligence for you specifically, and make sure you have data collection for. Largely from the discussion that we're having here, I would say that some of the biggest changes are the data that is available and the format of that data. With the shared responsibility model for the cloud, you don't necessarily buy an entire running virtual machine as you may have on-prem in the past used. You can buy just one service, a SaaS application or otherwise. And if you're just buying an HR application or Salesforce or something like that, right? the vendor of that software or the hoster of that software is going to choose what logs you get to see and what logs you don't get to see, but they're probably not going to give you the logs all the way down to the operating system level because they're taking care of that. And that's what you're paying to not pay attention to. But that also means that you have to learn how to, one, interpret the logs that they are going to offer you, and then make sure you can still see attacks on that system, even though you don't have kind of down to the operating system level visibility for that. Now, in theory, you shouldn't be able to get compromised down that deep of a level. The attacks you would see on a SaaS application would probably be web application attacks. But how are those going to be reported as opposed to how you host your own web applications? It's going to be a very different format. There may be different security tools involved. There may be different sources for each cloud vendor. That's what they're offering you in terms of visibility. So SOCs have to relearn certain data types and formats, and what they can and cannot see, and make sure that they can still catch attacks even when they're looking at data that is shaped differently and may contain different data than they would otherwise have had in their own environment. Yeah, the big things I think that most people are starting to pick up now are EDR, NDR, XDR, whatever you want to, well, not whatever you want to call it. They're three different things, but a lot of people are getting EDR tools, which has been a huge help in the last few years because previous to that, it was very expensive and complex to pick up the level of detail you needed to spot an advanced attack on an endpoint. If someone was using PowerShell and WMI and the things that are kind of down in the weeds in Windows, most people weren't logging those things at all, let alone have any concept of how they might be used for an attack. But now you can go to an EDR vendor and say, like, I don't know what I need to look for on my EDR. You tell me, and just install an agent and make it happen. In the past, we had some endpoint agents, but it was mostly antivirus and stuff like that. This is actually watching all the system activity, making it so you can log it, bringing it all back. And XDR kind of blends the network and the cloud aspects with the endpoint aspects, wraps it all together. It makes it even more usable. That's still a product category that's kind of being defined, but the people that have it seem to enjoy the capabilities that it's giving them. So I think that's going to be a bigger and a growing product category over the next few years. The other thing being automation, right? SOAR platforms are constantly helping SOCs get more done with less. And so that one's having a big impact as well. And I'm expecting we'll see more automation, more abstraction, and more getting rid of the stuff that people don't like to do as we go kind of into the next few years. Metrics are incredibly important because you cannot manage what you cannot measure. If you don't know what direction it's going and if it's working or not working, then you're not going to take any action on it and assume it's still all going well, right? And so one of the things I'm always encouraging people to ask the question on for anything in their SOC is, how do we measure this thing? And how do we know whether it's working or it's not working? What is the ideal version of whatever it is you're trying to accomplish? And how does that compare with a terrible version of that same sort of thing? And how can you numerically kind of tell the difference or measure the difference in a way that you can put on a dashboard or otherwise? And so, like, quick example, right? In a SOC that needs to collect security relevant data, like we've been talking about, they need to make sure that all that data continues to stream in. So a relevant metric, what does good collection look like? I'm collecting all the security relevant data that is been told to me by my threat intelligence vendor or otherwise that I need to collect. So you could say, am I collecting all the things recommended to me in terms of event IDs and data sources? And then for all the things you are collecting, are you still getting that information, or has one of those sensors gone down? That kind of logic, right? In a normal day-to-day sense, we should see 100% coverage of all the stuff that threat intelligence tells us we should be collecting. We have pushed out the policies to generate that data. And on top of that, for all the sensors that are supposed to be calling back to us, sending us data, they're all online, they're all working fine. Those kind of things are the kind of metrics that I'm always trying to push people to think, like, what defines good versus bad here? When you make a change, how will you know it was actually a useful change? What is the observable difference after this thing that you're doing? And how is that going to trace directly back to your goals in your SOC? And if you can't answer that question, then maybe it's a metric that's not so well thought out, or maybe just something that's flat out irrelevant. There's a lot of things you can measure, but there's only a few things you should be measuring. And it all needs to be kind of top down, started from what is the goal of this SOC? How are we knowing we're hitting that goal? And then moving from there.